I found the red envelope in my father's coat pocket 3 days after his funeral. It wasn't just any coat. It was that gray tweed one he only wore on important occasions, as he used to say. The fabric still carried his cologne, that woody scent mixed with pipe tobacco that I'd known my entire life. Mom had asked me to sort through his clothes for donation, but I kept postponing it. The finality of it felt too real, too permanent. When I finally gathered the courage and slipped my hand into the inner pocket, I felt the thick paper and velvety texture. Inside, there was an old brass key and a card with a handwritten address. 247 Maple Street, basement. Tuesday 2 p.m. Come alone. It was Tuesday. It was 11 a.m. My father, Henry Castle, was an accountant. A methodical, predictable man who took his coffee with exactly 2 spoonfuls of sugar every morning and read the newspaper in the same order. Business section first, then local news, sports last. He wore the same 3 ties on rotation and always parked in the same spot at the grocery store. The police said it was a sudden heart attack while he was driving on Route 9, just past the old miller's farm. His car had drifted gently into a ditch. No skid marks. No signs of struggle. Nothing suspicious. Nothing out of the ordinary. But that red envelope screamed that something was very wrong with that narrative. I stood in his closet for 20 minutes, just staring at that address. My rational mind told me to show it to Mom, or maybe take it to Detective Harper, who had handled the case. But something deeper, more instinctive, told me this was meant for me alone, that my father had hidden it precisely where only I would find it. I was the one who always helped him choose which jacket to wear for important meetings. He grabbed the car keys without telling Mom. She was in the kitchen, staring at his empty chair at the breakfast table, like she'd been doing every morning since he died. She didn't need to worry more than she already was. The drive downtown took 40 minutes through morning traffic. Maple Street was in the old downtown area, a part of the city I barely knew. One of those forgotten neighborhoods where the urban renewal never quite reached. Number 247 was an Art Deco building worn down by time, with a facade of broken blue tiles that might have been beautiful once, decades ago. Faded gold lettering above the door read, Riverside Commerce Building, Esther 1932. The main door was ajar, hanging slightly crooked on its hinges. I hesitated at the entrance. The lobby was dim, with only weak daylight filtering through dirty windows. There was an old elevator with an out-of-order sign that looked like it had been there for years. To the left, a staircase descended into darkness. I descended the narrow stairs to the basement, my footsteps echoing off concrete walls. The handrail was loose and cold under my palm. The hallway smelled of mold and fresh paint, a strange combination that made my stomach turn. Exposed pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping condensation. There were 4 doors along the corridor, but only one at the very end made of oxidized metal, with the number 3 painted in peeling white paint. My hand shook as I inserted the key. It turned with a heavy click that seemed too loud in the silence. What I found on the other side froze my blood. A small room with no windows, walls covered with photos. Hundreds of them. And I recognized every face. They were photos of missing people. Cases that had made the news over the past 5 years. Marina Foster, the medical student who disappeared after her night shift at the hospital. Robert Alcott, the businessman who never made it home from his conference in Denver. Julia Mendez, the teacher whose car was found abandoned near the lake. All there in clandestine photos, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, as if they were being watched for days or even weeks before they disappeared. Some photos showed them at coffee shops, others leaving work, walking their dogs, completely unaware they were being documented. In the center of the room, there was an old wooden desk with an open laptop. The screen showed a detailed spreadsheet. Names, dates, locations, amounts of money. Large amounts, 6 figures, 7 figures. Next to the computer, a cell phone I didn't recognize vibrated, its screen illuminating the dim room. I picked up the device with trembling hands. It was a message from an unknown number. You have 2 options, Henry's son. Leave now and forget everything you saw, or stay and discover the truth about your father. But if you stay, there's no going back. Choose quickly. You have 60 seconds. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it echo in that claustrophobic room. I looked at the photos again. So many faces, so many families still searching for answers. At the spreadsheet with its cold, clinical list of transactions. At the open door behind me, the dark hallway beyond representing safety, ignorance, a normal life. 60 seconds. The phone began counting down on the screen. 59. 58. My hand was already on the doorknob when I heard footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, coming down the stairs. More than one person. I could hear their muffled voices, speaking in low tones I couldn't quite make out. I panicked and ran out, pulling the metal door shut behind me but not bothering to lock it. I ran down the hallway in the opposite direction, found a second stairwell I hadn't noticed before, and climbed the steps 2 at a time, my breath ragged in my chest. I managed to get out through a side exit into an alley, then circled around to where I'd parked. I fumbled with the keys, dropped them, picked them up with shaking hands, and finally got into the car. I pulled out of the parking spot too fast, tires squealing. In my rearview mirror, I saw 2 figures emerge from the building's front door, looking around. I turned the corner before they could see my license plate. I drove in circles for 20 minutes through the old downtown, checking constantly if I wasn't being followed. Every car behind me seemed suspicious. Every person on the sidewalk seemed to be watching. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, and I kept replaying what I'd seen in my mind, trying to make sense of it. When I crossed the Winston Bridge over the river, I rolled down the window and threw the brass key as far as I could. I watched it arc through the gray morning air and disappear into the brown water below. Then I threw the red envelope out too, watching it flutter and sink. That night, Mom noticed my nervousness at dinner. I couldn't eat, just pushed the food around my plate. My leg bounced under the table. "Are you okay, sweetie?" she asked, her eyes full of concern. She looked so tired, so much older than she had just a week ago. "Just tired," I said. "It's been a hard few days." She reached across the table and held my hand, her skin paper-thin and cold. "Your father was a good man," she whispered. "Always remember that. No matter what anyone ever says, he loved us more than anything in this world." The way she said it, no matter what anyone ever says, made me wonder if she knew something. But I didn't ask. I tried to believe her instead. The following days were torturous. Every newscast, every newspaper, every website I could find. I searched for something, a clue, a mention, anything related to that room or those people. Nothing. It was as if that place didn't exist, as if I'd imagined the whole thing. I even drove back to Maple Street once, but I couldn't bring myself to go inside. I just sat in the car across the street for an hour, watching the building, seeing no movement, no signs of life. 2 weeks after I found the envelope, I received a package at my apartment. No return address, just my name typed on a plain label. Inside, there was a DVD in a blank case and a note written in block letters. "You made the right choice, but you deserve to know." I stared at it for hours. I almost threw it away 3 times. But curiosity, or maybe guilt, wouldn't let me. I waited for Mom to fall asleep to watch it. I went into my bedroom, closed the door, pulled the curtains, and put the DVD in my laptop with headphones on. The images destroyed me. It was security camera footage, grainy and black and white. The timestamp showed dates from 3 years ago. It showed my father, unmistakably my father, wearing that same gray tweed coat, in an office I didn't recognize. The walls were bare except for a calendar. 2 men in expensive suits sat across from him at a conference table. Their faces were partially obscured by shadows, but I could see their body language, confident, threatening. They pushed manila envelopes of money across the polished wood surface. My father hesitated. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, then took them. He counted the bills methodically, like he counted everything, then placed them in his leather briefcase. The briefcase I'd given him for his birthday 5 years ago. The date in the corner of the screen, 3 months before his death. But that wasn't what broke me. It was what came after. The camera angle changed. A different room, darker, more like a basement, concrete walls, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. A room where people were being held. I recognized Marina Foster immediately. Even though her appearance had changed, she looked gaunt, pale, frightened, sitting on a metal chair with her hands zip-tied in front of her. A man's voice off camera asked her questions I couldn't hear clearly. She shook her head, crying. The recording jumped forward in time. Weeks later, based on the timestamp, the room was empty, except for a dark stain on the concrete floor that made my stomach turn. Then another date. Another person, Robert Alcott, the businessman, looking defiant even with bruises on his face. Then another jump, Julia Mendez, the teacher, pleading with someone off camera. My father appeared in several frames, always in the background, always with his back turned or his face out of focus, delivering documents in manila folders to the men in suits. Never looking at the prisoners directly, I wanted to believe he didn't know what was happening to them. But the way he moved, quickly, nervously, without ever turning toward the holding area, suggested otherwise. The recording ended with one last scene that made my hands go numb. My father, alone in that first office, sitting at the conference table. One of the suited men pushed a red envelope across to him, the same velvety texture I'd felt in his coat pocket. My father opened it, read whatever was inside, and I saw his face clearly for the first time in the footage. He looked broken, defeated, old. He looked directly at the camera. He knew he was being filmed, had probably always known, and slowly shook his head in denial. His lips moved, forming words. "No, I can't, not anymore." Then he crumpled the paper, stood up and walked out of frame. 3 days later, according to the timeline I knew, he was dead, sudden heart attack, the police said. But now I knew it wasn't his heart that killed him. It was his refusal. I sat frozen, headphones still on, laptop screen gone dark. I don't know how long I stayed like that. The note in the package had one last line I hadn't noticed before, written in smaller letters at the bottom. He tried to get out. You were smarter. They're watching you. But you're safe as long as you stay irrelevant. The words hit me like ice water. I looked around my bedroom, suddenly paranoid. Were there cameras here too? Had they followed me home that day? How long had they been watching? I understood then what my father had become entangled in. Money laundering, human trafficking. Something massive and organized that had tentacles reaching into places I couldn't even imagine. But in the end, he'd tried to redeem himself. He'd said no, and it had cost him everything. I chose to live in ignorance that day at Maple Street. I chose safety over truth, survival over justice. But now, sitting in the darkness with that DVD, I realized something far worse. I was also a prisoner. They let me live because I was irrelevant, because I'd chosen not to be a threat, because I'd proven myself to be a coward. I stared at my phone on the nightstand. I could report this. I could take the DVD to Detective Harper, or to the FBI, or to a journalist. I could expose everything. But then I remembered the photos on those walls. 23 people missing over 5 years. And those were just the ones I'd recognized from news coverage. If an organization of that size had been operating for years without being discovered, without leaving traces the police could find, it meant they had infiltrators everywhere. In the police department, in the courts, maybe even in the FBI, who could I trust? And what would happen to Mom if I tried to fight back? I burned the DVD in my building's parking lot that same night, using lighter fluid, and watching until it was nothing but melted plastic. I flushed the ashes down the toilet. I deleted my browser history and broke the phone from the basement room that I'd stupidly kept in my pocket. I hadn't even realized I'd taken it until I got home. Sometimes, over the following months, I still drove past Maple Street on my way to nowhere in particular, just to see if anything had changed. The building stood empty and silent. Then, 6 months after that day, I drove by and found a construction crew tearing it down. They built a parking lot in its place, neat concrete spaces with fresh white lines, as if nothing had ever existed there, as if those people had never been held in that basement, as if my father had never walked those halls. Mom sold our family house the following year. Too many memories, she said, but I think she felt them watching too, even if she didn't know exactly who they were. She said she needed a fresh start, wanted to move closer to her sister in Vermont. I helped her pack everything. 28 years of marriage reduced to cardboard boxes. I never mentioned the red envelope. I never told her what I'd learned. Today, I work as an accountant at a small firm in Boston, just like my father. I live a simple, predictable life in a studio apartment with beige walls. I take my coffee with 2 spoonfuls of sugar. I read the newspaper in the same order he did. Sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I look in the mirror and see his face staring back at me, the same hollow eyes, the same defeated expression he wore in that final video. And I wonder if I made the right choice, because surviving and living are not the same thing. And I merely survived. I exist in a kind of limbo, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if they're still watching, wondering if one day they'll decide I know too much after all, wondering if my refusal to act makes me complicit in whatever continues to happen in rooms like that one. I'm 32 years old, and I feel ancient. But let me tell you what would have happened if I had chosen differently. I didn't leave the room. My fingers released the doorknob. The footsteps in the hall grew louder, but instead of running, I sat down in the chair in front of the laptop. My hands shook as I typed on the screen. I'm here. I want the truth. The response came in seconds. Look in the desk drawer. Bottom left. I pulled it open with such force it nearly came off its track. Inside there was a thick file. Easily 3 inches of documents rubber-banded together. Financial reports with highlighted sections. Bank statements with routing numbers circled in red. Photographs of men in suits shaking hands outside government buildings. Flash drives labeled with dates. And underneath everything, a letter handwritten in my father's distinctive cramped cursive that always leaned slightly to the left. My hands shook so badly I could barely unfold the pages. My son, if you're reading this, you made the decision I hoped you would make, even though I prayed you'd never have to. I need you to know, everything I did was to protect you and your mother. Every choice, every compromise, every sin I committed was to keep you both alive. 5 years ago, I discovered a money laundering operation at Brennan & Associates, the firm where I worked. I was doing a routine audit for one of our corporate clients, Kingston Imports, when I found discrepancies. Large ones. Money flowing through shell companies, false invoices for goods never shipped, cash payments to overseas accounts. I did what I thought was right. I went to the senior partners. That's when I learned they were part of it. All of them. The whole firm was a front. The money came from everywhere. Human trafficking, drug cartels, political corruption, corporate embezzlement. They cleaned it, made it legitimate, distributed it to people who used it to buy more power, more influence. Senators, judges, police chiefs, business executives. The network ran deeper than I could have imagined. I tried to go to the FBI. That's when they showed me the photos. You leaving your apartment for work. Your mother at the grocery store. They knew where you lived, where you worked, what you did every single day. They said if I told anyone, you'd both disappear. Not quickly. Slowly. Painfully. And they'd make sure I knew every detail of what they did to you. So I pretended to cooperate. I acted the part of the complicit accountant who'd turned a blind eye for money. They paid me, God forgive me, I took their blood money. But every dollar went into a separate account they don't know about, saved as restitution for the families of the victims if this ever comes to light. And while I pretended, I documented everything. Every transaction, every name, every shell company, every face. This room became my vault, my insurance policy. I rented it under a false name with cash 5 years ago. I came here late at night when I told your mother I was working overtime. Every piece of evidence you see here, I collected at the risk of my life. There's a copy of everything in a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown. Box 2847. The key is taped under the middle drawer of my desk at home. The password is your birthday, EO61590. Deliver everything to journalist Clara Montgomery at the Boston Globe. Only her. She's investigated corruption cases for 20 years. She's incorruptible. I vetted her thoroughly. Her direct number is 617-550147. I know they're planning to kill me. I heard them talking last week when they thought I was in the bathroom. They're worried I've become a liability, that I know too much, that my conscience might get the better of me. They're right on all counts. Forgive me for leaving this burden to you, but someone needs to finish what I started. These people have destroyed so many lives. The photos on these walls, every one of them was a person with a family, with dreams, with people who loved them. They deserve justice, be careful. Trust no one except Clara Montgomery. They have people everywhere. If you feel unsafe at any point, There's $50,000 in cash in the safety deposit box, along with false identification documents for you and your mother. Use them if you need to disappear. I'm sorry I won't be there to see you grow old, to walk your future children to school, to have one more cup of coffee with you at the kitchen table. But I'm not sorry for what I'm doing. Some things are worth dying for. Your father who loves you more than life, Henry Castle. Tears blurred my vision. I read the letter 3 times, trying to absorb every word, every instruction. My father wasn't a monster. He wasn't complicit. He was a prisoner who'd turned himself into a spy, who'd risked everything to build a case that could bring these people down. The phone vibrated again. Men are coming up the stairs. Exit through the back door behind the filing cabinet. There's a gray sedan waiting in the alley. License plate 7th G829, get in. Now. I grabbed the letter and the flash drives, shoved them in my pockets, and ran to the corner where an old metal filing cabinet stood. I pulled it away from the wall. It was lighter than it looked, on wheels, and found a narrow door I hadn't noticed before. The door opened to a dark corridor that smelled of earth and old concrete. I could hear voices behind me now in the main room. Check everything. Find out if he took anything. I ran through the darkness, hands outstretched, until I hit another door. It opened to an alley full of dumpsters and morning light. The gray sedan was there, engine running. The back door opened as I approached. Inside sat a woman in her 40s with short silver hair cut in a professional bob, sharp, intelligent eyes behind thin glasses, and a press badge clipped to her blazer. Clara Montgomery. You look just like him, she said softly as I climbed in. Her voice carried a mixture of sadness and determination. Henry was my friend, and a hero. We're going to make sure his death wasn't in vain. She nodded to the driver, a younger woman with alert eyes who checked the mirrors constantly. This is Sarah, my colleague. We're going somewhere safe. The somewhere safe turned out to be a hotel room Clara had rented under a fake name, paid for in cash. The next several hours were a blur of coffee, documents spread across 2 beds, and Clara asking questions while taking meticulous notes. Your father contacted me 6 months ago, she explained, reviewing the financial statements. He didn't tell me everything, he was protecting me, I think. But he said he was working on something big. He asked me to be ready, to have my legal team on standby, to coordinate with federal prosecutors he'd vetted personally. She looked up at me, her eyes wet. I'm sorry I couldn't save him. The following weeks were intense. Clara and I worked day and night, organizing the evidence into a coherent narrative that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. She had connections with investigative journalists in 6 countries, with federal prosecutors outside the influence of the organization, with FBI agents she'd worked with on previous cases who had proven their integrity. Mom was placed under police protection, not local police, but federal marshals Clara trusted personally. When I finally got to see her at the safe house, I explained everything. She listened without interrupting, tears streaming down her face. When I finished, she pulled me into a fierce hug. I knew, she whispered. Not the details, but I knew something was terribly wrong. He stopped sleeping. He started drinking. He'd wake up screaming from nightmares. She pulled back to look at me. I asked him once what was wrong, and he just held my face in his hands and said, I'm trying to do something right. Something that matters. It might cost me everything, but it's worth it. She touched my cheek. He wanted you to be brave. Now I understand why. He was preparing you for this moment. The story was published simultaneously in 6 countries on a Monday morning. The Invisible Network, a 5-year investigation into international money laundering and human trafficking, ran across the top of the Boston Globe. The Washington Post, The Guardian, Le Monde, Der Spiegel, and the Sydney Morning Herald. Clara and 3 other investigative journalists had spent weeks coordinating, making sure the evidence was ironclad, making sure the scope of the coverage would make it impossible to suppress. Within the first week, 23 people were arrested in coordinated raids across 4 countries. Among them, Senator Richard Brandt, who'd been chairman of the Banking Committee, Detective Chief Samuel Morrison of the Boston PD, Federal Judge Patricia Whitmore, and executives from 5 major corporations. Brennan and Associates was raided at dawn. Computers seized, accounts frozen. But the most important result came 2 weeks later. 17 victims of human trafficking were rescued from locations identified in my father's documents. Facilities in 3 states that had been operating in plain sight, disguised as warehouses or light industrial buildings. Marina Foster was among them. Alive. Traumatized, but alive. I attended her reunion with her family, watched her mother collapse in tears of joy, and felt something break loose in my chest, some knot of guilt and grief I'd been carrying. During the trials that followed, trials that dragged on for 18 months, I testified 6 times. I sat in courtrooms and looked into the eyes of the men who'd killed my father. I watched as prosecutors presented my father's meticulously documented evidence. I listened as survivors told their stories, their voices shaking but determined. They were all convicted. Senator Brandt got 43 years. Morrison got life without parole. Judge Whitmore was sentenced to 30 years. The executives each got 20 to 30. Brennan and Associates was dissolved, its assets seized and distributed to victims' families and anti-trafficking organizations. But victory had its price. I live under a new name now, Michael Thompson. Mom is Sarah Thompson. We had to relocate to Seattle under witness protection after credible death threats. I can't go back to Boston. I can't visit my father's grave. I can't contact old friends or former colleagues. I had to abandon my entire life. I work as a consultant for an accounting firm, using my skills but never staying anywhere long enough to form real connections. Mom lives 3 blocks away. We have dinner together twice a week, and never speak about the past where anyone might hear. But every time I see a news report about a trafficking ring being busted, every time I hear about a money laundering investigation, every time someone's long-missing family member comes home, I know it was worth it. My father wasn't just an accountant. He was someone who, when confronted with true evil, chose to fight back even knowing the price. He could have looked away. He could have taken the money and stayed silent. But he didn't, and I chose to honor that, to finish what he started, to make sure those 17 people got to go home, to make sure his death meant something. Sitting here years later, I still think about those 60 seconds in that basement room, the countdown on the phone screen, the choice that split my life into 2 possible timelines, 2 doors, 2 lives, 2 versions of who I could become. In one timeline, I survived but didn't live. I carried the weight of cowardice and secrets until it hollowed me out from the inside. I became a ghost haunting my own life, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if they were watching, always knowing I'd abandoned those people to their fates. I looked in the mirror and saw my father's face, but only the defeated version. The man captured on security footage with his shoulders slumped under the weight of compromise. I inherited his guilt, but not his courage. In the other timeline, I risked everything and lost my life as I knew it, but gained something infinitely more valuable: peace. The ability to sleep at night. The knowledge that when it mattered most, I chose the hard right over the easy wrong. I became the man my father had been trying to be, the man he'd died becoming. There's no objective right or wrong choice when the world conspires against you, when the cost of justice might be your life. There's only the choice you can live with afterward, the choice that lets you look at yourself in the mirror without flinching away. My father left me that red envelope not as a burden, though it was heavy. Not as a punishment, though it cost me everything. He left it as a test, yes, but more than that, as a gift. The gift of choice. The gift of knowing what he'd done, who he'd been, what he'd stood for when it mattered most. He didn't just want me to discover the truth about him, about the crimes he'd witnessed, the evidence he'd gathered, the people he'd tried to save. He wanted me to discover the truth about myself, what I was made of, what I would do when faced with the same impossible choice he'd faced: safety in silence, or danger in truth. In those 60 seconds, I became whoever I was always meant to be. Which version of this story do you think is real? Which version do you think I'm living? Sometimes late at night when the nightmares wake me, I'm not even sure anymore. Both feel equally true, equally possible. Maybe that's the real lesson, that we all live in the shadow of the choices we didn't make, haunted by the roads not taken. But I know which version I hope is real. And I think my father would too.